You are not lazy. That is what you've been taught to believe. That you lack discipline, that you need more focus, more determination, more coffee, more time. But what if I told you that you are being manipulated, not by an external force, but by something even more dangerous? Your own fear? Not the obvious fear that paralyzes you in the face of danger, but sophisticated fear. The fear that whispers, that hides behind plausible justifications. The fear that wears the mask of prudence, strategy, logic. It is fear that convinces you that tomorrow will be better, that you need more time, more preparation, more confidence. But tomorrow never comes, and what seemed like planning turns out to be a prison disguised as perfection. Procrastination is not weakness. It is self-protection. It is a defense mechanism disguised as rational choice, because to start is to expose yourself. And you know that, once exposed, there is no going back. That is when fantasy comes into conflict with reality. And maybe, just maybe, reality doesn't live up to the image you've built of yourself. This is the silent dilemma that no one talks about. You're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of discovering that you're not as good as you thought you were. That's why you wait, hesitate, organize the environment, perfume the air, light the candle, but you don't start. Meanwhile, time doesn't wait. It marches on, relentless, leaving behind versions of you that were never born. And each one carries wasted potential, a possibility stifled by the illusion of the right moment. In this video, we'll expose this mental game. We'll reveal how fear builds traps with its own hands, and how taking back control requires courage, not comfort. Because the greatest power is not to dominate the world. It's to stop being dominated by yourself. The first trap of fear is simple. It doesn't present itself as fear. It appears as the voice of reason. And you believe it, because this voice doesn't shout. It argues, calmly, logically, with conviction. It says, "This is not the right time. You need to understand better before you act. You're just being cautious." And so, fear takes hold, not as an enemy, but as an advisor, as if it were your own wisdom, protecting you from mistakes, keeping you from ridicule, sparing you the pain of trying and failing. But this protection is a dangerous illusion, because it doesn't save you, it paralyzes you. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman explains that we have two systems of thought, one fast, emotional, reactive, the other slower, analytical, rational. It turns out that the emotional system is much more influential than we like to admit. It makes decisions before the rational system can react. And the rational system, instead of correcting, only justifies what has already been decided emotionally. In other words, when you decide to postpone, avoid, wait, it's not because you've calmly evaluated and made a logical decision. It's because you felt afraid, and then you built a beautiful story so as not to appear weak. And this story is convincing, so much so that you believe it. This is when fear takes over. Disguised as self-care, it installs slowness, hesitation, eternal preparation, not as flaws, but as virtues. And the world applauds. What a prudent person, what a meticulous professional, what maturity in waiting for the right time. Little do they know that there is no strategy there, there is internal manipulation. The mind builds castles of caution to hide an army of insecurities. Fear, this invisible master, orchestrates everything perfectly. And the more you postpone, the more you reinforce the belief that you can only act when you are perfect. You enter a vicious cycle. You postpone because you don't feel ready, and you don't feel ready because you never act. The most perverse thing is that this fear doesn't just want to protect you from making mistakes. It wants to protect your self-image, your ego, the idea you have of yourself. Because if you really try with everything, with dedication, with vulnerability, and still fail, what's left? The collapse of your identity. That's why fear prefers you to wait, to rehearse, to imagine. It prefers you to live in potential, not in practice. Because potential is invincible. It has never been tested. It only exists in your mind. And there, you are always brilliant, always ready, always victorious. But living in this mode is handing over control of your life to a faceless entity that makes decisions for you every day. Fear disguises itself as logic so that you never confront it. And so it dominates you more effectively than any external force could. It becomes your silent mentor, shaping your decisions, defining your limits, dictating what you can and cannot achieve. And the most dangerous thing, you don't realize it. You believe you are in control, when in fact, you are just following the orders of an unrecognized emotion. That's why procrastination is so hard to overcome. It's not a conscious mistake. It's a sophisticated emotional engineering. And as long as you treat it as laziness, as a lack of discipline, you'll continue to attack the symptom, not the cause. The real revolution begins when you expose this invisible master. When you recognize that that quiet voice, that sensible justification, is actually fear using your intelligence against you. And then, only then, can you begin to disobey. You begin to understand that fear is not only paralyzing you, it is deceiving you with refinement. But there is a second, even more perverse movement. It does not immobilize you just to protect you. It seduces you so that you participate in your own sabotage. With talent, with style, with justifications. Because the truth is too brutal, you do not postpone by chance. You postpone because dreaming hurts less than failing. You postpone because idealizing is safer than exposing yourself. And in this dance of illusions, your greatest enemy is not laziness. It is the desperate love you have for your self-image. The human ego is a fragile entity. It lives on the idea we have of ourselves. And this idea needs to be preserved at all costs. When you dream big, plan, and visualize a brilliant future, you are feeding this image. You are the visionary, the strategist, the talent yet unrecognized. And as long as everything is in your mind, you continue to be this glorious promise. But it only takes one act, one real attempt, for all of this to be at risk. Because by acting, you invite the world to judge, and worse, you expose yourself to the possibility that not even you like what you see. That's why you love the idea of the project more than the project itself. You love the theory, the preparation, the phase in which everything is possible and nothing has been tested. Because in that place you are invulnerable. And that's why you organize, list, review, study, but you don't deliver. Procrastination at this point is no longer a mistake. It's an unconscious choice. It's the mechanism that prevents the collision between the ideal and the real. It's the invisible wall that stops you from finding out if you really are everything you imagine or not. And this wall has a name: fear of invalidation. The fear of trying sincerely and being average. The fear of doing it with passion and being ignored. The fear of showing your soul and hearing silence in return. This type of psychological pain is more feared than criticism. Because criticism can be challenged, silence cannot. It echoes in the void with brutal force, and that is the kind of void that the ego will do anything to avoid. Nietzsche's philosophy points to a fundamental concept here. Human beings do not seek truth, they seek what sustains their belief structure. And if truth threatens that structure, it is rejected, avoided, or glossed over. This is exactly what happens with self-sabotage. You are not just avoiding a task, you are defending your idea of yourself. You would rather not try, and thus maintain the illusion that you could have been great, than try and discover that maybe, just maybe, you are ordinary. And that, for many, is worse than failure. It is the disappearance of the fantasy of greatness. This is why so many people live for years in a state of almost. They almost started. They almost were great. They almost changed everything. Because almost is comfortable, it is poetic, it is promising, and above all, it is safe. Almost protects you from final judgment. It keeps alive the idea that if you really put in the work one day, everything will be amazing. The problem is that that day never comes. And you start living in a false narrative, feeding an internal myth that only survives because you've never been confronted with reality. This is the essence of self-sabotage. It turns your fear into a strategy. It makes you believe that you're being careful, when in fact you're being cowardly. And this cowardice isn't a lack of courage, it's an excess of ego. You don't want to get hurt. You don't want to be disappointed. You don't want to admit that maybe it takes more effort than you thought. And so you hide, inside yourself, behind small tasks, useless occupations, elaborate excuses. Time passes and you convince yourself that you're doing something when in fact you're just avoiding the real fight. The final irony? You call it perfectionism. As if it were a virtue. As if it were noble to wait for the right moment. But perfectionism is not excellence. It is stylized fear. It is the vanity of control. It is the refusal to be seen as being built. And if you do not accept being seen as being built, you will never be seen as complete. Because nothing is born ready. Every path begins with stumbles. All power is born from exposure, and every failure is just the prelude to improvement, if you have the courage to continue. But as long as fear is in charge, you will continue to call escape a strategy. You will continue to protect yourself from the only thing that could, in fact, free you: starting. And then, without realizing it, you are not only being manipulated, you are actively collaborating with your own imprisonment. Because deep down, you still believe that delaying is safer than trying. Everything changes when you understand that fear cannot be overcome with thought, only with exposure. Because thinking, however noble it may seem, is the last stronghold of your comfort zone. That is where fear survives. It lives in simulation, in the eternal review of possibilities, in the draft that never becomes a work. And as long as you think, plan, imagine, it is still winning. Therefore, the only real way to disarm it is to go through it, to act. Even with fear, even without clarity. Because clarity does not come first. It is born from the friction between action and chaos. The metaphor is simple. You do not train when you are strong. You become strong because you train. In the same way, you do not create because you are confident. You become confident because you create. And this requires a type of courage that the world does not teach. The courage to be seen without being ready. The courage to fail in public. The courage to launch yourself with shaky knees and a choked voice, but still launch yourself. Because there, and only there, does transformation begin. Baltasar Gracian said, "Exposure is the filter of authenticity." What he meant was that no one knows themselves in their ideas. Identity is only revealed in gesture. You only discover your strength when you are forced to use it. And what seemed like weakness, in practice, was just a lack of movement. Fear loses power when it is confronted with reality. When you act, even badly, even wrongly, even improvising, you break the spell. Because fear needs silence to grow. It needs inertia. It needs you to believe that you're preparing yourself, when in fact, you are just hiding. Exposing yourself is the only road to real power. Not the power that dominates others, but the power that dominates yourself. Because when you start, even trembling, you take the steering wheel of your life from the hands of fear. And maybe you will make mistakes. Maybe you will fail. But it will be you, and no longer the voice of panic, who decides the direction. This is the brutal turnaround. You will not think your way to readiness. You will act your way to power. And every manipulator, even the one inside you, loses its power when it is finally exposed to the light. Be honest. Have you ever felt that no matter how hard you try, no one truly sees you? It's not about lacking value. It's about knowing how to make it visible. The social game isn't fair. If you don't know the rules, you're left behind, but you don't have to stay invisible. In the Anti-Week audiobook, I share 22 strategies to master interactions, gain respect, and step out of the shadows. Click the link in the description now and start the transformation only you can make happen.